Why do new distribution centers fail? Well, joining us to speak about that today is David K. Schneider, force multiplier at David K. Schneider and Company. Well, David, welcome.
Thank you, Russell.
David, you make the very interesting case that most startup DC operations fail, and then operators compound that sin by covering it up, not admitting it. So what leads you to make that statement? Walk us through it.
Well, nobody likes to admit that they failed. Right off the bat. That's one of the barriers that people run into. The other thing is that they don't necessarily identify what failure is. When they start off a new distribution center, they don't, or any new operation, they don't necessarily set a measurement of, if we don't hit this, it's a failure. So the failure to set goals sets them up for failure. And most startup DCs fail. I've looked at this for over 25 years, and I'd say maybe about 8% of the DCs that I looked at actually were successful, that they met their goals out of the gate, and a year later were meeting what their intended outcome was. The rest of it, 92%, no, they didn't reach their intended outcomes by the end of the first year. And if you don't reach your intended outcome, you failed.
And of course, you don't want to go around telling anybody about that.
Of course not.
Let's talk about the characteristics that DC operations are going to face when they're starting up. Or is it fair to say that there are certain characteristics that they all must confront in the beginning?
They all are abnormal operations. A new facility is new. People don't know where to go. They don't know where the restrooms are. They don't know the systems. They're new. The supervisors are usually new. The managers are usually new. Companies often take a manager that they've pulled from another facility who's been in that facility, an operating facility where people know what they're doing, and they put them into this new facility. And they have to create everything from scratch. It is all, by definition, abnormal. And the manager's job is to get it to normal. So that's the first thing that new facilities fail to establish, is a definition of normal. What is normal? What is going to be normal operations? And that's the job of the leadership function inside of a distribution center. The executive needs to set that course, the general manager needs to set that course, and on down the line, everybody needs to understand what the definition of normal is and then work to getting to normal. The second piece ends up being that it's consistent through all these facilities that management isn't present on the floor all the time. This is a new facility. Everybody's got questions. They're looking for leadership on the floor. And if I walk into a failing operation, I'm guaranteed to find a lack of leadership on the floor. Whether that leadership is management or direct line supervision. I will find leadership, but it won't be official leadership. It will be shadow leadership by some people who have just stepped into the breach and said, all right, I'm going to figure this out. They may not be figuring it out the way that the systems operate or the way that the company wants it to operate, but somebody's walked into the breach to set it up and to run it. The third that's fairly consistent is a lack of ability to clearly communicate. They don't use consistent terms. They don't use consistent language. They don't set the tone, and they don't set a sense of positive leadership that's present on the floor. Finally, the fourth piece that I run into that I see consistently is written instruction. And people will depend on verbal, and verbal is often misunderstood. You put it into writing, people execute. People can refer to it. So your processes need to be driven by written instruction. You need to use writing to drive the instruction. Along with that is that you need to make sure that your processes are as clean as possible. Most fails come from what I call tortured processes. The process has too many steps. The steps don't make sense. And when things don't make sense, the staff have a hard time following it. Now, I ran through 4, but there's actually a 5th. And that 5th is victory. And it's the failure to define what you're going to call victory. That is the outcome. Normal is what you want, but victory is what you're trying to point everybody to.
Permit me, if I can, the cynic in me wants to say that everything that you just outlined, and however real and genuine those problems are, no doubt about it, those are problems that plague existing operations. What makes them specific to new operations? The cynic wants to say that I don't really see a difference here.
Well, the cynic is correct that you see these same symptoms in existing operations, but they existed since the beginning of the operation. So from the get-go, you get these 5 things wrong, and it's going to stay that way. It ends up becoming very hard to try to turn the operation. And so you walk into an existing facility that has these same problems, and you can pretty much bet it's had those problems since the day the doors opened, and even before that. So I look at the victories, I look at the startups that at the end of their first year met their objectives. They addressed all 5 of these issues, and they did it from the get-go.
You know, you just mentioned it now for a second time, but I want you to develop this, if you will. This normal versus victory. They're not the same, really. Normal operations, that's not the same thing as victory then?
No. Normal operations is what is it that I expect you to do? This is the minimum. This is where I want us to be operating every day. Victory is where we're setting goals that stretch us beyond the normal. And that when you achieve a victory, that becomes your new normal. But you're constantly trying to improve the operation. And a victory also is something that it's not as much your operations practices driven, but it's an achievement. A victory would be, we broke a company shipping record. Okay, that's a victory. We've gone for 3 months without a lost time incident. That's a victory. And so when you have victories, you need to recognize them. You need to celebrate them. And then you need to set new objectives, new outcomes that you want to reach. Great, we did 90 days without a lost time. Can we get it to 120? Can we get our shipping to where we can break another company record? Can we receive to where we take our receiving errors to less than 0.5%? Those are all flags in the sand victories that you reach for. Normal is what your expectations are. And normal goes much finer grain in the operation. Victory's big. The whole facility can measure it and see it. Normal gets down to the nitty-gritty. And so there's a scale difference between normal and victory. And then there is victory drives and grows your normal expectations.
Dave, final question. Earlier you and I were speaking about what you referred to as the 5 hallmarks of failure. I'd like for you to walk us through what those hallmarks are, and then tell us, how do they fit into operations?
Well, once again, it comes down to failing to define what your normal is. It comes down to lack of present and positive leadership on the floor. It comes down to tortured processes. It's the 3rd. The 4th is a failure to put instruction in writing to document what your processes are and what your expectations are. And the 5th, which is probably the most important, is a failure to define and declare what victory is.
Seems to me now that there's no question why it is that so many of these new startups fail. No question whatsoever. David, I know you're busy here at the conference, but you took time to meet with us. I want to thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Russell.
Well, it's David Schneider with David K. Schneider and Company, and speaking with us today about why so many new DC startups fail. Thank you for watching.